theyeshiva.net.
The opening pasuk verse of Parshas Lech Lecha is really one of those verses that has left and created one of the greatest impacts and influences in all of history, as it begins a journey of one lone person to an unknown destination. The Parshas Lech Lecha begins with the words Vayomer Hashem al Avram. Hashem says to Avram, Abraham, Lech Lecha, me'artzecha u'mimoladedecha u'mibeis avicha el ha'aretz asher areka. Literally translated, go to you from your land, from your birthplace, from the home of your father, to the land which I will show you. Avram Avinu, who was 75 years old at the time, he's not called Avraham yet, or Avinu, our father, or Abraham. He's not a father, nor is he Abraham. Avraham, he's Avram. Aleph Vez Reish Mem, without the Hey. Avram, not Avraham. I'm using that name simply because of what would happen later on in the story. He hears the call and he obeys. He, together with his spouse Sarah, and together with their nephew and their entire entourage, they leave a place called Haran, and off he goes on this journey. This journey would be the beginning not only of a new life and not only of a new chapter in history, but of it's the beginning of the birth of an entire new nation that would be charged to create a paradigm shift in human consciousness, in human civilizations, in human civilization, and ultimately change the world. But when we focus on this particular verse, which is what I want to do today, one immediately notices a few very enigmatic details that challenge us and stimulate us to take it one step deeper. On the most basic level, this is a divine commandment to the first man and woman who would become the first Jews, the father and mother of Jewish history, the founding fathers, the founding father and mother of the Jewish faith, if you will. It's a geographical instruction. Hashem tells Avram, I want you to leave. He was living in a place called Haran, a region called today Mesopotamia, in Iraq, northern Iraq. And he says, Lech, go, journey. Lech, from the word vayelech, to go. Lech is halicha, movement, journeying, transitions. I want you, Lech, I want you to move on, leave your land, leave your birthplace, and leave the home of your father, and go to the land which I will show you, which of course is the land called the land of Canaan, the land of Canaan, later would be known as Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. But then it was called Eretz Canaan, the land of Canaan. But if that's what this commandment was all about, a few questions come to mind. First of all, what's the Lech Lecha? Go to you. You don't go to you. In Hebrew, even till today, you say Lech, go. Me'artzecha, from your land, from your birthplace, from your home. Lech me'beitcha, Lech me'artzecha, Lech me'ircha. What's Lech Lecha? You go with you. You're the one who's going. You're not going to you. Lech Lecha, this is obviously a very striking expression that all of the commentators, beginning with Rashi and everybody else, struggle with. The next question is something which seems very superfluous. The moment you're telling Avram to leave his country, his land, that includes automatically leaving his birthplace and leaving the home of his parents. The home of the parents is in the birthplace, and the birthplace is in the land. So once you say, Lech lecha me'artzecha, el aretz asher areka, the message is clear. Leave your land and go to another land. Imagine you would tell somebody, leave the United States of America, leave New York State, and leave Rockland County or leave Monsey. The moment you're leaving the United States of America, automatically you have left New York, you have left Monsey, and you have left Forshay. So once you say Lech Lecha Me'artzecha, all other expressions that come afterwards are already included in leaving the land. They're superfluous. But the question really becomes stronger. If for whatever reason you want to specify, you want to get into details, you want to specify, leave your birthplace, leave your parents' home, leave your country, the order should have been opposite, should have been reversed. Lech lecha mibeis avicha, leave the home of your parents. Now let's take it a step further. You could move out of your home of your parents into the home of your uncle, or into the home of your neighbor, get a house next door, or next block, as happens all the time. That's what parents wish for. Get married, but stay close. So say, Lech lecha mibeis avicha, from the parents to your home. But these could still be in the birthplace, in the region where you were born. So the next stage is leave your birthplace. And then, not only leave your birthplace, leave your entire land, leave your entire country, which is a more expansive and encompassing term. So if you already want to specify the three, the order is wrong. You don't leave your country and then leave your parents' home. Once you left your country, you already left your parents' home. Lech lecha mibeis avicha, then mimayladetecha, and then meyartzecha. Even if you want to specify the three, which is also not understood why you need all three, but even if you want to say all three, the order doesn't make sense, because if you left your land, you already left the other two. The order had to be the other way around. Start with the smaller and then expand the departure. It's not only enough to leave your parents' home, it's not only enough to leave, let's say, not only enough to leave your parents' home, not only enough to leave the neighborhood, your birthplace, the region, the community, the neighborhood, the city, the state, but even the entire land, the entire country, as we would call it today. Finally, this is the first instruction given by God to the first Jew, to Avram. This is the first communication. There will be others. There will be 7 communications of God to Avram that we will study. But this is the first one. This is the opening statement, the opening message. One would therefore assume that this would contain something fundamental to the legacy, to the perspective, to the Weltanschauung, to the view of Judaism. Yet at first glance, it seems no more than a geographical instruction. Why is this chosen as the first time he communicates them? The first message I have to tell you is, it's time to pack your suitcases and bags and leave. That's the first and opening statement of the Creator of the world to the first Jew. One would assume that the opening statement would be something that would define the relationship, the message, the theme, the mission, the purpose, the perspective, the hashkafa, etc. So throughout the ages, as you can imagine, many of the commentators, many of the mefarshim, of different generations, different milieus, different countries themselves, different backgrounds, and different levels of interpretation have offered various perspectives on trying to glimpse some of the depths of this opening statement of Hashem to the first Jew, Avram. And today, Be'ezer Hashem, I want to explore one interpretation. There are quite a few, I'm saying, but let's try to explore at least one. Chazal famously say, Shivim panim l'Torah, there are 70 faces to the Torah, meaning everything has 70 faces, 70 ways to look at it. And the Arizal writes in Shara Gilgulim that every verse and mitzvah and law and story of the Torah has 600,000 interpretations in Pshat, and 600,000 interpretations in Remez, and 600,000 interpretations in Drush, and 600,000 interpretations in Sod. Because every soul, generally there are 600,000 souls. Those souls are branched off into many more, but there are 600,000, let's call them like root trees, and every root has its branches. So there are 600,000 Neshamas Yisrael, and each soul has its own interpretation. V'sein chelkeinu b'seiresecha. Give me my part in Torah. We have our interpretation, our unique relationship with it. So each soul has its own interpretation. On a literal level, Pshat, Remez, homiletical level, Drash, which is more Talmudic and interconnected level, and Sod, which is mystical and esoteric level. Each one 600,000. So that means 2.4 million, right? 2.4 million, 2,400,000 interpretations just to begin with. So you could sit at shiurim for your whole life, and you could sit with teachers throughout all of history, and I don't know, people get to 3, 4, 5, 6, 70 faces is already pretty loaded. 2.4 million is quite a dramatic number, but it demonstrates how many layers of significance exist literally in each verse. And it's really not strange that there are so many interpretations, because since Torah is infinite, it's divine, and therefore it's infinite. So infinity actually includes much more than 2.4 million. 2.4 million is already a compromised number relative to infinity. So we're going to explore, out of 2.4 million interpretations, one. The journey of 2.4 million miles always begins with one class. Always. And here we'll discover how each question is really an answer. Every question that we raised, we asked why it says Lech Lecha, go to you. There's no need for that word. It's an extra word, and it's a confusing word. You go with you. You're the one who's going. You don't say go to you. And it's a go to the airport. Go to the airport, not go to you to the airport, or wherever you're going. The second question of why the need of all three geographical statements when they're superfluous, one is included. The next question about the order, which seems reversed. And the next question, which is why this was the first message of God to the first Jew. All these questions are really answers. Meaning, when we understand the deeper perspective of this verse, at least one of the deeper perspectives, we see that it's precisely written this way in order to convey the message it's trying to convey. In addition, of course, to the literal geographical instruction, I want you to go away from this place and go to another place. The Gemara says in Shabbos 63, generally every pasuk also has a very straightforward literal interpretation, but within it is contained not only a geographical commandment, but also what you might call an existential commandment. This is not just an instruction to Avraham Avinu about geography. I want you to move away and relocate from this place to a new place, which is in itself significant. But much more than that, it's an existential directive about moving away from a certain type of existence to a different type of existence. And based on this, the Torah has to say Lecha. The Torah has to include three things: your land, your birthplace, and your parents' home. And particularly in this order, because when I'm asking you to move away, not just physically, geographically, then I just say leave the country, leave the United States, and that means, leaving New York and leaving your community and leaving your neighborhood and of course leaving your home wherever you live. If you left the United States, you left your home if you grew up here, or whatever other country you're leaving. In that case, it happened to be Iraq. But if I'm talking not only about a geographical relocation, I'm talking about an existential paradigm shift. I'm talking about a movement in terms of a person's self-image, self-perception, a person's internal character and identity. Here I precisely have to communicate it. Here I precisely have to enumerate all of these three components, and precisely and particularly in this order: your land, your birthplace, and then your parents' home. And in order to appreciate the message here, contrast is always helpful. Generally, as you know, in teaching and understanding, contrasts are always useful because contrasts allow us to appreciate something in contrast to something else. Shlomo HaMelech said this clearly in Koheles when he says, Ra'isi, I saw, sheyesh Yisrael lechachma min asichlus, ki Yisrael ha'or min achayshach. There is an advantage to wisdom versus folly. Sichlus is folly. Narishkeit, and what's another word for it? Foolishness, stupidity, rubbishness. I have seen there's an advantage to wisdom against folly, as the advantage of light versus darkness. What is Shlomo HaMelech telling us here? So one of the interpretations is, obviously, wisdom is greater than folly, and light is superior to darkness. That's why we crave light. That's why we thank for the sun every day. There's a special bracha, Yotzer Hama'oris, Yotzer Ohr, Uvoyre Choshech, Oiser Shalom Uvoyre Sakel. We thank for the luminaries, Hameir La'aretz, V'Ladorim Allah Barach, and we don't take it for granted. What Shlomo HaMelech is saying is that sometimes you need contrasts in order to appreciate it. Sometimes you can't appreciate wisdom if you don't see the other side. And sometimes you can't appreciate light. I guess you could never appreciate light if one doesn't know darkness. Sometimes it takes people to experience the exact opposite, then not to take for granted a blessing, a gift. It's very easy to take things for granted, but it's the contrasts that allow us to compare things, both emotionally and also intellectually. When you really want to appreciate something, maybe an idea, a certain way of thinking, and you contrast it to another one, Shlomo HaMelech says that's very important. And what he's trying to do is say, what he's really trying to say is, even deeper, that when you see the opposite, don't get discouraged because it's simply God trying to help you create a contrast so you'll be able to know what to contrast it against. Meaning, in a person's life, sometimes a person will experience folly, a person will experience sichlus, a person will experience darkness, and they can become submerged in it and stuck in it. But really it's only there to create a contrast. A great artist knows that a beautiful piece of art uses contrasts in order to be able to convey the art. Life is a beautiful piece of art. So we're also summoned to use contrasts. So when I encounter something that is dark or really folly, it's only there to create a contrast. So I should be able to know now what's the opposite idea or directive that I have to introduce here. So in order to really appreciate this message, we got to go to the contrasts. And the nucleus of this idea I read once in an essay by the former chief rabbi of Britain, Rabbi Yonason Sachs, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. In history, there were 3 Jews who really impacted history in a very profound way. Whether positive or negative, I'll leave to you to decide, dear audience. And I won't state a verdict about that today. I am not in the position anyway to state a conclusive verdict because this is a complex 3 people. But like in everything in the world, ein tov b'lo ra ve'ein ra b'lo tov, no good without evil and no evil without good. But one thing is certain, they have had a tremendous impact on history and on the thought of history. All 3 of them were Jewish, and it is quite fascinating and dramatic to note that when one studies history, the disproportionate influence and impact that Jewish minds and Jewish personalities have had on history is beyond mind-staggering. For a nation that still today does not make up even 1% of human civilization. And listen to what I'm saying. We don't constitute even 1% of human civilization. I should correct myself. We don't constitute even 0.5% of human civilization. I should correct myself further. We don't constitute even 1/4% of human civilization. Or as somebody once said, the number of Jews is less than a statistical error on a Chinese census. Think about that. Okay, there are 1.2 billion Chinese. As I'm talking, another million were born. And we're still fighting for every Jew, 14, 15 million Jews, 2.5 billion Catholics, 1.6 billion Muslims. But when I was once in China, and I was speaking to a professor, and he asked me how many Jews live in the world. He said, Yo Tairen. You know what Yo Tairen means? In Mandarin, it means you're Jewish. Yo Tairen. So yeah, he wanted to know how many Jews there are in the world. So instead of answering, I said, what do you think? He said, 3 billion, 4 billion, how many? I said, why this number? He says, from the noise that you make. The graggers, Purim and Shul, the graggers, the noise that you make Can't be less. I mean, can't be less. In Indonesia live 300 million people. How often do you read about Indonesia? Anybody? 300 million people. It's a nice amount of people. 300 million people. How often do you read about it? Once in 10 years. Sadly, when there's a tsunami or some other crisis, people remember there's Indonesia lives. Israel has 6.6 million Jews, not 300 million. 6.5 million Jews. And I don't know if a day goes by that some story of Israel does not occupy the front pages of almost every newspaper and every major news outlet in the world. And it's been this way not only since 1948, but since 1948. Do you understand what I just said? Avraham Avinu was born in 1948. 1948 since creation. Israel was established in 1948 after the Common Era. So it's not only this way since 1948, but it's this way since the first 1948, since creation. And it's really, really mind-staggering. And it all begins with that second verse where God tells Avram, when you leave, something is going to happen. I'm going to turn you into a great nation. I will bless you. Your name will become great. You will become a source of blessing. And then he gives this universal declaration, which even many Jews till today have a hard time wrapping their brain around. All the nations of the earth, of the entire planet, will be blessed through you. In other words, your role is to become a source of blessing, not only for yourself, not only for your family, not only for your community, not only for your larger community, not only for your people, but all families of the entire planet, Kol Mishpachos Ha'adama, will be blessed through you. And as an introduction to that, he says, Va'avarchem avarechecha, I will bless those who bless you, and those who curse you, I will curse. Which is also not only a promise, it's also, as most of the Torah, a prediction of history. Those who bless you are blessed. Those who curse you are cursed. It's not just if they bless you, they'll get a blessing. He's actually defining this. It's a promise, which is actually a way of looking at history. And you could go through history and you'll see this almost without exception. If you ever want to know if a nation, if a country is a good place or a horrible place for its own people, how human rights are respected, how minorities are respected, if there is oppression or freedom, tyranny or self-actualization, abuse, atrocities, suffering caused to people who are dissidents or disagreement, misery, agony, or prosperity, happiness. There's one litmus test that never fails. Look at their attitude towards Jews. You'll see it. Look how they treat Jews. You wanted to understand Stalinist Russia in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s? You wanted to know if it's a paradise or a living hell, like many million of Western intellectuals thought that it was a paradise? Just look how they treated the Jews. When Hitler came into power, he started off as usually with the Jews. They never end with the Jews. Suicide bombing started in Israel. They didn't start in the Twin Towers, didn't start in Madrid, didn't start in London, didn't start in Paris. Started on Egged buses, basketball fields, and pizza shops, and shuls, and yeshivas in the Holy Land. Then came September 11th. Because where there is a nation that despises Jews, that sees Jews as the embodiment of evil, you could immediately know there's rottenness here. There is decadence here. When the Jews become the scapegoat for the ills of their own society, you can understand this is a culture that needs a lot of healing, a lot of repairing. Throughout history, he says, those who bless you, you'll look at those countries and you'll see there's blessing there. And those who curse you, you'll look at those countries and you'll see their own people will be targets. Their own people will suffer horribly. The Muslim countries where there's horrible abuses of human rights, they all have one common denominator: their hatred to Israel, their hatred to the Jewish people, a vile hatred beyond rationality. Israel, relative to all the Muslim countries, is like a match on a football field. And yet that match somehow is responsible for all the ills of the entire football field. So part of this is seeing the impact of Abraham's people, Avram's people on the world. Sometimes in very powerful, always in very powerful ways, but in different ways. And three of the Jews who have left a great impact, and as I told you, you'll be the judge of the nature of that impact, are three names. Karl Marx, Baruch Spinoza, or Spinoza as they call him, and Sigmund Freud, or his real name, Shloimeh Freud, which he did not like to hear. Each of them posed a major argument that you could say, if you wish, was a protest, or I should say, an alternative to the opening verse of Lech Lecha. There are basically two types of atheists. There are atheists who just don't believe in God, or say they don't believe in God. But there are atheists for whom atheism becomes a religion. That's a very different type of atheism. There's an atheism, I don't know, I don't believe, I'm an agnostic, don't bother me. Either I have my pain, or I have my questions, or I'm not interested. But then there's an atheism which I take as serious as my religion. In other words, the atheism itself becomes religious, which means it's very dangerous because you can't dispute it. Atheism that is based on pure rationality, you can argue with it, you can debate it. But when your atheism becomes a religion, so now one will believe in it with the same fervor that religious people believe in religion. So there's no question in the world could challenge it because my atheism is rooted in religious fervor, in religious zealousness. It has this fundamentalism to it. I'm angry about it. I was once giving a lecture. It was a different type of community than this community, a very different type of community. And I mentioned the word God, the G word, which in some places you got to be careful with. And somebody freaked out. In very passionate and sophisticated but emphatic terms. God does not exist. Science has proven that God does not exist. Eloquent but very, very emotional. So I looked at him and I said, relax. Why are you getting so emotional about something that doesn't exist? I never saw anybody getting so emotional about something that doesn't exist. What is in your kishkas? What is in your gut that you're getting so emotional about? That's a very different type of atheism. I once heard from Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, Rabbi Adin Even Yisrael, should have a refuah shlema from Yerushalayim. Quite a powerful experience that he had. He lives in the Moshava HaGermanit, in the German colony in Jerusalem. Shabbos morning, he walks 40, 50 minutes, probably 40 minutes, to the old city of Yerushalayim, the Rova, where he davens in the Tzemach Tzedek shul in the old city. It's a shul that survived yet from the 19th century, and the Jordans did not destroy it, even though they destroyed all of the shuls, and it was rededicated after the liberation of the old city, after June 1967, the Six-Day War, and he goes there every Shabbos to daven. On the way, he's walking one Shabbos morning, whatever it's 8 or 9, whatever the time was, and he meets a very left-wing, liberal Israeli artist. No left-wingers like Israelis. Israelis know how to be left-wingers much better than Americans. Americans have caught up, especially recently, but Israelis have a unique genre of left-wingers, let's put it this way. This guy was a sophisticated person, an intellectual, a liberal artist, and he meets Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, who's very respected in Israel by all segments of society. He himself grew up in a secular home. He's a Baal Tshuva, and he's known as quite a great scholar, extraordinary scholar and author. Translated the whole Gemara into modern Hebrew. I think one of the first one to do that. and many other works that he wrote. And this man meets him and he says, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom. Where are you heading? And Rabbi Yadin says, I'm going to Shul. Shabbos, I'm going to Shul, to the old city in Yerushalayim. He says, where are you heading? And he says, there's one place you could still buy bacon and eggs here. So in honor of Shabbos, for breakfast, I'm going to buy bacon and eggs. He says, wow, and what do you do for the second meal of Shabbos? Shabbos, we have 3 meals. He says, there's one place you could still buy real treifa wine. Yayin Nesach. So that's what I'm going to do. And what about for Shalashudas? He says you could still get shrimp and lobster in one of the places, one of the restaurants or cafes. That's where I'm going to go for the third meal of Shabbos. And Rav Steinsaltz looks at him and says, what else do you do in honor of Shabbos? He says, I'm of course going to go to the beach, make sure to carry my books there, and enjoy the beach and read them and so forth. So Rav Adin tells this person, he says, Ani mekaneh becha. I'm jealous of you. I'm jealous. He says, of course you're jealous. You're going to shul, and I'm a free person. He says, nah, that's not why I'm jealous. He says, so why are you jealous of me? I'm jealous, he says, of how deeply Shabbos impacts you. I have to say about myself that sometimes Shabbos doesn't affect me. It comes and it goes. I go through the routines. I have a meal, I make kiddush, I go to shul, I learn, I read, but it doesn't really get into my bones. But for you, Shabbos, wow. And then he tells him these words in Hebrew. Ani choshesh shegam ata shomer Shabbat. Kamoni. I'm afraid to say you also observe the Shabbat. You do it very differently than I do it. But you observe it, and you observe it with more passion. If Shabbos wasn't a meaningful day, you just sit home on your couch or read a book. Stay in bed, sit in the garden. No. You have to go find a place where they serve bacon. And a place where they serve lobster. And a place where they serve yayin nesach. And you have to make sure to violate Shabbos. Why? You also need to observe Shabbos. It means a lot to you. He says, that's why I'm jealous. And the fact is, this person became a Shomer Shabbos. He started to observe Shabbos. He realized the truth that sometimes we have a deep relationship with something, but we can't have a relationship of love. We're not ready for it. So how do we substitute it? We create a relationship of hate. But a relationship of hate is also sometimes a very, very deep relationship. But it's the only way I could justify the relationship. I'm not ready for an open, emotional, loving relationship. But the emotions are there, the connection is there. So I substitute it with a relationship of hate. And fortunate is the person who could see the depth of that relationship. It's very easy to look at the external element of it and say, there's no connection here. There's actually a deeper connection. And sometimes the depth of hate is commensurate with the depth of love. As deep as the love is, so is the hate, which is only the opposite side of it. I once heard from the late Eli Wiesel, Olav Hashalom, who said, this was a Holocaust survivor, and some of you have read his works. He was a close friend of my father, Olav Hashalom, and he once said, some Jews love God. Some Jews are angry at God. Some Jews are in love with God, and some Jews are furious at God. But he says, no Jew knows how to ignore God. They don't know how to ignore God. And that's a uniquely form of Jewish atheism. It's not just, I don't care. Ooh, do I care? Which, of course, is representative of a very deep connection, a very deep relationship. My father was the editor for many years of a Yiddish newspaper, the Allgemeine Journal, which he founded and edited. And as a result, our home was a place where many Yiddishisten would come. And I knew many of the old Yiddishisten. Some of you still remember the name. Yiddishisten was a very significant group of Jews who believed in Yiddish culture and despised Jewish religion. Yiddish was everything. They had schools in Yiddish, but they were atheists. And the Farvitz, you know what the Farvitz is? Today there's the Weekly Forward, but the Farvitz was a daily Yiddish, socialist, left-wing, anti-Jewish newspaper, but very Yiddish in terms of culture and history. And this originates in Russia with a group of the Bundisten. Bundisten were left-wingers, Yiddishisten who were socialists, and they called themselves Apikursim. So I remember I was once speaking to the head of what's called the Arbitering, the workmen's circle. They called themselves the workmen's circle, Arbitering. And at one point they had 600 Yiddish-speaking schools in America and Canada and South America. 600 Jewish day schools, Yiddish-speaking. No zecher to Yiddishkeit as a faith, but Yiddish was the language, the culture, the future. And he told me that the Farvitz, the Forward, and the whole Forward Association, they would make an annual ball, an annual banquet for all its members. I said, when? It's interesting, was there a date chosen for this ball? He said, yeah, Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur. So I said, think about this. Why Yom Kippur? Why not Zayin Cheshvan? Why not Zayin Kislev? Why not Zayin Shvat? He says, no, it had to be on Yom Kippur. Because they needed to observe Yom Kippur. They couldn't ignore Yom Kippur. They could love it or eat on it, but they couldn't ignore it. So if you want to understand a lot of Jewish history, that's how you have to understand it. And different Jews worked very hard in this way. Not always consciously. More than often it's subconscious. But when you notice the depth of attachment to a particular philosophy, one realizes it's not coming from an objective scrutiny and analysis. But sometimes there's very deep psychology and emotions in it, like really most decisions that people make. But sometimes you see it in a very vivid fashion. Karl Marx, Benedict Baruch Spinoza, and Sigmund Schleimele Freud pose different arguments about what is the decisive influence on history. What is the most important factor that creates destiny for humans as individuals and for human society as a collective? Groups, societies, communities, countries, states, nations, cultures, religions, faiths, etc. Marx, as you know, in his manifesto, argued that the key issue of what defines all of human history is what he would call class warfare. Those who have more versus those who have less. It's basically ownership, economics. Your economic status, that is what defines who you are, how you feel about yourself, how you feel about the people around you. And therefore he is the father of the socialist movement. And what was the main contribution idea of the socialist movement? Complete economic and financial equality. In its ultimate incarnation in the communist regime in the Soviet Union after the Bolshevik Revolution 100 years ago, 1917, which came to implement the vision of Karl Marx in actual society, the ultimate vision was no ownership. Despite your talents, your creativity, your inheritance, your genius, all of the companies or businesses you created, the state owns everything, and we distribute to everybody equally according to their needs. The kibbutz movement in the land of Israel for many years was trying actually to take socialist ideas and implement it in the modern state of Israel. And many of the early founders of Israel, secular Jews, were deeply influenced by the socialist ethic and idealism of Karl Marx, which attracted millions of young Jews, because in many ways it's very idealistic, especially when you're young. A world that is free of war, of violence, of strife, because all war, violence, and strife, Marx argued, had to do with land, economics, ownership, those who have versus those who don't have. The serfs and the workmen and women who were being manipulated and abused. For him, all religion, all government, All developments of society was simply the brilliant strategy of people who have to be able to manipulate those who don't have and keep them in order, that they should not revolt. That was it. That's what systems of government did. That's what monarchs did. That's what priests did. That's what the church did. That's what all religions did. That's all it was. And it came the time, Marx said, where the workmen have to rise in revolt and say, the world is all of us. The world belongs to all of us equally. And for him, this was it. You deal with this problem, you create financial equality, and you healed the world. This was a messianic utopia introduced by Marx and first implemented by the revolution of Vladimir Lenin, followed by Trotsky and Stalin and all of the leaders of the Soviet Union, which created one of the greatest living hells on earth. Stalin himself killed close to 50 million people in the name of this socialist ideal, which of course doesn't tell us anything about the idea themselves. It tells us more about Stalin. But nonetheless, the two are connected, but that's not the topic of our lecture today, the relationship between the original ideas of Marx and what happened in the Soviet Union. You could, I'm sure some of you have read Animal Farm. Everybody is equal, but some are more equal than others. So, George Orwell got it pretty right when it came to this issue and some other issues. And the fact there is that Marx was a Jew. He was baptized as a child. His father was baptized. Marx had a special hate to the Jewish people because that has to do with Jewish self-hate. That's the atheism I spoke about. You see it in his writings. But this was his argument. You are controlled by your financial state. That's how it is. And he said, look at what people worry all day about. They're stressed, the bills, tuition, today, mortgages, achasana, bar mitzvah. Whenever you hear people complain, at least a disproportionate amount of complaints are about money in one way or another. The stress that comes with it, the anxiety. And he says all war came from this, all violence came from this, all bloodshed came from this. And if the world can deal with this, we're good. This is ultimately what controls the human identity. That was Marx. Spinoza argued that our nature, our inborn nature, is what determines our entire destiny. Today we would call it genetic determinism. That term didn't exist yet in the 17th century in Amsterdam, where Spinoza lived. Was actually a good yeshiva bacher, smart kid, until he was put into Cherem. He was excommunicated. If you go visit Amsterdam, the big shul of Amsterdam, make sure and you'll see the original Cherem, the original ban hanging in which they excommunicated Spinoza in the 1600s. Now, one thing is sure, when you put somebody in Cherem, he becomes famous. That's why it's not always the most effective. You know, when they ban a book, it becomes a bestseller. You ignore it, nobody knows about it. They talk about it for a week and a half. You ban it, you say it's the worst thing that ever descended on the face of humanity, and suddenly there's a black market that's created around the book. So Spinoza, in his own way, became a hero also in the Jewish world, and he became a very celebrated philosopher. And he was the founder of a philosophy known as pantheism, which basically argues that God equals nature and nature equals God. But in terms of human psychology and development, the argument is, I am who I am. I am who I am, and there's nothing I can do about it. Each of us is born what we call today genetic, our genetic composition and makeup, and I'm simply playing out a script. If I would know my DNA, you would know your DNA. You're simply playing out a script like a robot. Choice is an illusion. That was Spinoza. And then came our dear friend Shlomo Freud. And he argued that we're basically all living out the traumas caused by our mothers and our fathers. That's basically what it's all about. It's basically the trauma already in the womb. It's not even your choice. It's already in the womb. We are driven by the complexes of the idioplex of libido, of our deep, complex relationships with our fathers and with our mothers. That is basically the landscape, the backdrop that defines human life. You are responding to mom and you're responding to dad. That's who you are responding to, in one way or in another way. All three philosophies had compelling evidence, continue to have compelling evidence. The impact of finances, of money, of ownership on people's psychology and behavior is obvious. Poverty-stricken societies are driven to certain notions. Prosperous societies live in different ways. People's sense of self, sense of peace is a completely different sense. The argument of genetic determinism is obviously very deep. Can I really change? Can I really become what I can't become? Can you teach a dog new tricks? You could teach a dog tricks, but the tricks have to be confined to the world of the dog, to the orbit of the dog. Especially with Charles Darwin, who came after Spinoza, lived in the 19th century, in the 1800s, who then gave true scientific basis, from his perspective, I should say, to Spinoza, saying that essentially we have evolved, Homo sapiens, through natural selection, have evolved from primates and have evolved from animals. So does anybody think that animals wake up in the morning and say, what type of animal do I want to be today? The lioness wakes up in the morning and says, maybe it's time to do tshuva and feel a little bad for the deer and antelope and baby elephants and cubs. Maybe I could train myself with a personal trainer to start eating hay and be satisfied with hay and wheatgrass. Maybe I could start juicing, the lioness says, and give my cubs juice, and we'll supplement our diets with vitamin A and vitamin B and vitamin C and everything else we need instead of the fat protein diet. Somehow nobody expects that from a cheetah or a tiger or a hyena or a lioness. The lion is supposed to be a lioness, the frog is supposed to be a frog, said Darwin, and he writes this in The Origin of Species, that one of the most important consequences of the theory of evolution is that fundamentally we are no different than animals. We're more sophisticated, our brains have developed 15.3 billion years since the prebiotic soup and cholent, but fundamentally you are a beast. One of my top 10 jokes, I don't know one of my top 10, but one of the better ones, is about a bar mitzvah boy who wants to talk about his yichus at the bar mitzvah. You know, thank his ancestors, where he comes from. So he comes to his mother and says, where do we come from? Yeah, I want to know about the family. So she tells him about the family, the babim, the elta babim, the elta baba, you know how it is. Bialystok, Varsha, chief rabbi Hitch, you know, people when they start with their yichus, etc. No, the beginning. She says, the beginning? In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. 6 days he was done. On Friday, he created Adam and Eve. For some reason, they decided to have children. I'm not sure why. And the rest is history, or actually not history, but her story. Not history, which is his story. And then you had Abraham and Sarah and Isaac, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah, and here we are doing your bar mitzvah. He says, wow, that's so beautiful. And he comes to his father. His father was a proud graduate of MIT, and he tells Tati, tell me the history of the family. Of course, he tells him the whole history. No, the beginning. He says, in the beginning there was a big bang. It took billions and billions and billions of years. And here we are today, we have evolved. We have evolved over tens of millions of years from apes. And where did the apes come from? The ape came from other primates. And where did they come from? Other animals. And how did it all begin? It began with an explosion of gas and bacteria. And he comes back to his mother and says, Ma, I'm very confused about the bar mitzvah speech. I want to talk about our origin. You tell me we come from God, Adam, Eve, Abraham, and Sarah. Daddy tells me we come from apes, monkeys, gas, and bacteria. What should I say? Where do we come from? And she says to him, my dear son, there's no contradiction. Your father is talking about his side of the family, and I'm talking about my side of the family. So both work. In many ways, if you will, the first opening statement of God to Avraham Avinu, to the first Jew, was a protest against these three ideas. Not because these ideas have no merit, precisely because they have merit, precisely because they are compelling, precisely because they are persuasive and because they carry weight. Ideas that don't carry weight, one need not protest. Ideas that carry weight, one needs to show the alternative. So in the opening declaration of the statement of God to the first Jew, he says, Lech Lecha. I want you to go away. And I want you to go away from three ideas. Artzecha, Moiladetecha, Umibeis Avicha. Artzecha, the land idea, the earth, Eretz, the earth, the land. The idea that ultimately all that controls you and us and humanity is land, physical property. How much I have, how much I don't have. Although it's important. Number two, and this is harder, Moiladetecha. I want you to be able to step away from the notion that you are the same person who you were born. Moiladetecha, from the word moiledes, means that which is inborn, innate, intrinsic. You are simply playing out a script like a robot. Your freedom is an illusion. Everything is predetermined based on your physiological composition, based on your chemistry. There are 40 trillion cells in your body. Let them decide, and you just play it out. There are even those who argue today, serious people, David Harris, Sam Harris, and others, atheists who argue that the complete free choice is an illusion. When somebody murders somebody, they say there's absolutely no choice, and therefore they don't deserve a punishment. He says, I don't mean you shouldn't put them in prison. Maybe put them in prison for practical purposes. Because it's like, you'll lock up a wild elephant or a wild gorilla, a wild lion. But he says, never call it a punishment. Never call it a penalty. There's no such a thing as a penalty. Penalties could come for choice. But this person pulling the trigger was absolutely no choice. He or she was completely predetermined to such extremes. The human being, actually, all your choices, nothing. You think you're going on a diet tomorrow? It's not your choice. You think it's your choice. You decided to come here, you decided to go there, you're doing that. There's no choice whatsoever. Wake up and smell the brilliant coffee. And even whether to take a coffee is not a choice. Why did I decide this morning to take a coffee? Because you brought it to me. Think I had a choice? And why you decide not to have a coffee? So you read an article and you get inspired. I'm vaccinating, I'm not vaccinating. Measles, no measles, vitamin A. You think you have a choice? Some people read the same article and say, nonsense. Another person reads the article and calls up every sister and every aunt and every niece. Starts doing research, drives the school crazy. Whose choices are these? All genetic. Moiledes, you were born a certain way, and that's all you have. Enjoy it as much as you can. Some people love this philosophy because it absolves everybody from every responsibility. Every responsibility. The purpose of medication is simply to make you sometimes feel better. If it feels better, great. Sometimes you got to lock up the wild animal because it's dangerous. But don't blame it ever. The concept of tshuva doesn't exist. There's no such a thing. I'm not accountable. I can't be accountable. And then, of course, you had Freud. And Freud said, just blame your mother. Just blame your mother. That's always the right thing to do. And if your mother doesn't have enough guilt, blame your shviger, your mother-in-law. That works because you're part of your husband's life and you suffer the consequences of your mother-in-law. And if not, blame your father-in-law. And that includes not just father and mother. It means community and parents and teachers and educators and those who are responsible to shelter us and educate us and mentor us. It takes a village to raise a child, even though today's times have changed already. Unfortunately, we don't have villages raising children. We're lucky if we have one mother and one father raising a child, is Shein Mazel. But it was an interesting thing. It takes a village to raise a child. I had Sukkos. I have a brother-in-law and sister who live in Miami, so they came for Sukkos to us. So it's an extended holiday, and they stayed a few days. They came a few days before, and I watched my nephew doing something, and I gave him a comment. I told him a comment with humor, but I told him something. And his mother says to me later, she says, it's so nice that a person has an uncle to tell them things that Tati or Mommy can't say. And then I realized that for many generations, children were not only raised by parents. They were predominantly, or at least equally, raised by uncles and aunts and grandparents. And you know, an uncle could tell you things that nobody can tell you. You know what I mean? An uncle could tell you things. If your father says it, it's abusive. If your mother says it, she's neurotic. But an uncle has this closeness and this distance, and it's a valuable resource. And so many of us in today's generation don't have that. Whole idea is gone. By many, not by everybody, but by many, it's absent. It's a valuable resource. So when we speak about father and mother, it's of course father and mother, the greatest impact on people. And Freud said that's what it basically is. I am responding to the deep complexes that are born out of my own relationship with my mother and my father. And we know how compelling that is. Any one of you who was in therapy, is in therapy, will be in therapy, knows that at first, second, or third session at most, hours and hours will be dedicated to your mother. Not to you. And to your father, and to your brothers, and to your sisters, and to your mother's mother, and to your father's father, and the Holocaust, and before, and Europe, and after Europe, and the trauma, and this home, and that home. I thought I came for therapy, not my mother. No, who are you? Who are you? You're just a little piece of the puzzle here. You're just playing out traumas of 3,500 years. Don't take yourself so seriously. For that itself, you got to go back into therapy. That's what this child heard their whole life, and now they're hearing it again from the therapist. You're just a manifestation of Tati and Mami. So these words of God to Avraham are not such small, they're not just geographical instructions. I want you to move from here to there. Of course, that too. But this is really, I need you. The first thing I'm telling the first Jew is, I need you to be able to make a paradigm shift in order to become the carriers, the ambassadors that are going to change history, that are going to transform the landscape of planet Earth, in order to father the nation that will become the ambassadors of God, ambassadors of light, of infinity, of holiness, of hope, and of love. And for this, you have to be able to move away and remember there is no such a thing that you're stuck. Of course my finances are important. And of course my nature is critically important. And of course the influence of my parents, both positive, and I should say even more positive, or sometimes challenges, each one according to their own story, is very, very powerful. We are in so many ways products of our education. You know what your mother did for you, and I'm talking here in positive ways. People love talking negative. We should also talk sometimes about the positive. What your mother put into you, what your father put into you. I know not in every case, but in so many cases. The blessings, the courage, the resolve, the love, the shelter. Again, not in every situation, but in so many situations. And those are so powerful, and it's what we cherish. What we give our children is so much of what's going to constitute the framework in which they will live. But that's the key. It will constitute the framework in which they will live. It will constitute the landscape. It will constitute the context. But it will not define you exclusively. For this, you have to remember there's one more item, and that is Lech Lecha. And that's why before he tells him what to go away from, he first tells him where you're going. I can't tell people to go away from something if I don't give them an alternative. It doesn't work that way. You take an addict and you try to create a detox. If there's no alternative, if there's no alternative of hope, of success, of promise, it's often not going to work. A person has to be able to see redemption in order to extricate themselves out of exile. A person has to be able to see light in order to be able to extricate them from darkness. This is very important. Sur meira v'asei toiv. Lech lecha, he tells Avraham Avinu. I want you to understand that I want you to go not away from yourself. I want you to go lecha. I want you to just go to you. I want you to discover your deepest, deepest you. And your deepest, deepest you, lecha. As the Alshich says, l'shoirish nishmascha, the true root, the core, the quintessence of your mind, the quintessence of your psyche, the quintessence of your soul. But the only way you'll be able to discover that lecha is if you will have the courage to be able to step out, me'artzecha, of the notion that you are completely defined by your economic status. Or as the Gemara says, Ein asher ela b'deya, vein ani ela b'deya. Wealth is uniquely a product of consciousness, and poverty is uniquely a product of consciousness. This doesn't mean that people shouldn't have money and shouldn't be successful. You and all of us should be blessed with lots of wealth and lots of land. And we should remember what Winston Churchill said when he wanted to define the system of socialism. And he said, yes, socialism is about equal distribution. Capitalism is about unequal distribution. But capitalism, democracy is about unequal distribution of success. And socialism is about equal distribution of misery. And those of you who know anything about Sovietsky Ruslan, Soviet Russia, where my parents grew up, know that in Soviet Union you had nothing. One thing everybody had, every home, a television. In the 1950s, Americans could dream about a television, couldn't dream. In Russia you had, you know why? The government sponsored it. You know why? Propaganda. The best tool for propaganda was the television. You didn't have bread, but you had a television. Ronald Reagan, who defined the term the axis of evil about the Soviet Empire and was not forgiven by many of the left-winger ideologues who loved socialism. But he was right. It was an axis of evil. Once quipped, I don't remember exactly, but it was quite a few years ago, but Reagan said something of this nature. He said, you know, the Soviet Union, somebody calls up and says, I need a telephone. I need a telephone. And they say, oh, you have to wait 12 years. Okay, we're going to come Tuesday, January 12th, and 12 years from now. What time? What time? And they say, we're coming 10 o'clock in the morning. And Reagan would say, you can't come then. He said, why not? Because they're coming to fix the washing machine at that point. So what happens here is wealth and poverty are important. But the greatest wealth and poverty is the wealth and poverty of consciousness. The wealth of poverty of knowing you have choices or you're a victim. The wealth and poverty, there are people who are wealthy and have nothing. There are people who are poor and have everything. Reb Simcha Binim of Pshischa said, As me verliert Geld, verliert men gar nicht. Geld kommt and Geld geht. If you lose money, you lost nothing. Money comes, money goes. Am me verliert de Gesund, verliert men halb. If somebody, God forbid, forfeits their health, they lose half of themselves, their bodies, not their souls, but their bodies. And then he said, aber me verliert de Mut, verliert men alles. You know what Mut is? Courage. If you lose money, you lost nothing. Health, you lost half. If you lose your courage, you lost everything. What is courage? Courage is the knowledge that there's an I, and that I is formed in the image of God. And God's definition is, I don't know who God is, but one thing I know about God, He is free, uninhibited, not boxed in. We don't have a definition for God in the Bible. Moshe says, don't make images. Why not? What does he care if I do a coloring book with my kids and I make a picture of God and I hang it up on the refrigerator? Isn't it cute? Your 3-year-old comes home, makes an image of God, we put it on the refrigerator. No, who cares? So you made a picture of God, and when your daughter makes a picture of you, it looks like you? Chaloshes. You wouldn't come out to the class. But it's cute, because it's a 3-year-old making a picture of mommy and makes the whole family, and you put it on the refrigerator and you stare on it until she leaves the room. And it's so beautiful and cute, and because it's a baby's picture. So I make a picture of God. I'm different than your 2-year-old baby. God should smile and say, that's so cute, why? That's so cute. I'm so adorable. Hashem says to me, I'm so adorable. No, avodah zarah, it's the worst penalty. Why? Why? In the 10 Commandments. Let me tell you one of the deepest reasons for this. Open your hearts. Because the human being was created in God's image. If I create an image for God, God is fine. But ultimately it means that I create an image for myself. It means that I'm fixed, that I'm stuck. And the idea of humanity from a Jewish perspective is God has no image. And that means you have no image. I have no image. I put myself in a particular image. And if I put myself in one image, I can extract myself and put myself in another image. In other words, I choose to be the person that I want to become. I choose to be that person. I choose my image. I am not defined by an image. Lech Lecha, Lech Lecha. That Lecha is free. That Lecha could use everything in life as a study of contrasts. Yes, there are landscapes that are the background of my life. I can't change this thing from the video. It's going to be the backdrop. Of course, there's economic realities that you're born into. You can change them, but you're born into certain economic realities. You all know that about your own lives. You're born with certain natures that I'm not going to change. I can't change my chemical composition always. There are still things I can do with brain elasticity and some other interesting, pretty crazy stuff they're coming up with today. That too. But relatively speaking, I'm still subjected to certain patterns, but I'm subjected. It's my landscape, but I'm not stuck. I can define it as a landscape, as a portrait, as a backdrop, or I can define it as destiny. If I define it as destiny, this is who I am. If I define it as a backdrop, this is the place in which, this is the arena in which I have to grow. This is the arena in which I become aware. This is the arena in which I metamorphosize myself. And the same is true with parents' influence. Of course, parental influence is decisive. That's why chinuch is critical. That's why what you do with your children every single night and every single morning is not just impactful, it's life-changing, life-altering in the positive, and chas v'shalom the opposite. The messages, the gestures, the way we interact, the way we communicate, and most importantly, the emotional bonding, the emotional presence, which is what children need more than any lecture in the world. The emotional presence, the emotional connection, the discipline, the guidance, the direction, the nurture. These are not just important, these are life-altering, as we say. And the same, therefore, the damages that have been done or are done through parents, consciously or unconsciously, or through systems of education, or in schools, or in communities, again, consciously or unconsciously, willingly or unwillingly. It's not about judging anybody, especially those of you sitting here who have been through very difficult circumstances that I will naturally, graphically not elaborate upon, but those sitting here or watching who know exactly what I'm talking about. They represent the landscape and the arena, the boxing arena in which I have to box, in which I have to live my life. But they don't define me. They don't tell me the person I have to be, the person that I have to be and I want to be. I choose, and I could choose it based on my values. What is my true value? What is truly valuable to me? This is Lech Lecha. When I leave go of all of this, I sometimes say, what's going to be? I don't even know myself. If I'm not the angry person, who am I going to be? If I'm not the guy who's angry at the world, who am I going to be? If I'm not the person who's dealing with jealousy, who am I going to be? If I'm not the person who just doesn't know how to have a relationship, who am I going to be? And the answer is Lech Lecha. You'll be you. You'll be you. And the definition of you is you have no image, just like God has no image. You choose your image. You choose the person you want to become. But that choice can't ignore the first three. Because if the choice ignores the first three, you're probably repressing. God doesn't tell Avram, you don't have a land, you don't have a birthplace, you don't have parents' home. You do have a land. You do have a birthplace. You do have parents' home. That's part of the story. And within that context, I am telling you, you have them. Don't ignore them. Don't judge them. Don't make believe they don't exist. But understand that there's a lecha that transcends all of these powerful influences and impacts. There's a you that is essentially divine, sacred, wholesome, impeccable, flawless, holy, powerful, confident, optimistic, and happy, and most important, free. Free under all circumstances. And that's why the first opening, the first statement of the first Jew is, with this notion you can go ahead and become the blessing to all the families of the earth. that every single human ultimately can be taught that nobody is ever stuck. Inevitability is not part of the Jewish dictionary. It's inevitable. My marriage has to be miserable. It's just the way it is. My relationship with my children has to be flawed. My relationship with my parents has to be horrible. My relationship with my siblings is going to be a fight forever. My relationships with myself has to be filled with endless tension, anxiety, and depression. It's inevitable. My relationship with money, my relationship with worrying, my relationship with God, my relationship with friends, it has to be defined by a never-ending struggle and worry and feeling of the abyss. Yes, there is a backdrop that I have to deal with. But it's not I have to deal with it. I was chosen to deal with this contrast, these contrasts. This is the land. This is the birthplace. I don't know what I have against this poor, nice pink curtain. So it's like garnish verzindigt. But I'm just using it. Everyone has their purple backdrop. And actually, this is not a bad color. Sometimes the backdrop is a little of a different color. But that's the color in which I can become the artist. There's the contrast that's given to me on the canvas. I can't always create that. But within that, I can become the artist and paint a beautiful picture and set myself free from these powerful influences. El ha'aretz asher areka, to the land that I will show you, to the land that will allow you to become the divine human being you were destined to become. Asher eka, I will show you. Says the Alshich, it should have said, El ha'aretz asher excuse me. Alpi diktuk, the Alshich says, El ha'aretz asher areka means the land, not only the land that I will show you, the land asher eka asher era oischa ba'atzmacha, the land where I will show you. Asher eka, I'll bring you to the land where I will show you who you really are. Have a wonderful week.
This class is brought to you by theyeshiva.net. Please help us continue the classes. Make even a small contribution at www.theyeshiva.net/donate.